Alright guys, welcome to this presentation that I've dubbed hashtag lower trap love, and this is a follow-up to the article I wrote on the website. And if you want to check that out, I'll put a link in the description below. It's athletefix.co.uk. And this presentation is all about giving you some actionable points in the form of 3 exercises to enhance lower trap activation. So it's not that upper traps are inherently bad at all, but especially us in the CrossFit community and pretty much everyone living just day to day, there seems to be this very slippery slope that's easily slid down to end up with a very sort of overactive upper trap and weak and inhibited lower trap. So again, it's not that upper traps are bad, but we kind of unknowingly, I think, perform activities, like in the picture on the top left where we're on the phone, shrugging our shoulder up to our ears, and obviously that's engaging, the upper trap in a shortened position. When we're stressed, upper traps are one of those very common muscles that we tend to, hold a lot of tension in. Again, this is kind of this insidious onset where we're stressed. We don't realise that's happening, usually until we, have someone prod their finger in there or get on a roller or a massage ball, and it feels awful. And then again, there's just a lot of exercises within CrossFit programming, especially some of the Olympic lifts that lead us to just kind of naturally develop a lot of hypertrophied, overactive upper traps, but relatively weak, underused lower traps. And I can't emphasize enough, and that's hopefully what I'm going to get across to you today, how important lower trap activation, function, and a healthy balance between upper and lower traps is. So again, just to I can't remember where I got this picture, but yeah, just to hammer home the point that upper traps, we're severely out of balance here. Got this big guy on the upper trap side. Yeah, it's just to illustrate that point that we've got far too much activation, hypertrophy of that muscle group, and not enough of the lower traps. And we know this to be an issue because in research, people who have shoulder impingement are symptomatic, they're in pain shoulder wise. Research has shown that there's in symptomatic participants that there's often a 3-to-1 upper trap to lower trap ratio, and in asymptomatic individuals it's often either a 2 or less than 2-to-1 ratio. So we want exercises that don't just fire the lower trap, but ones that also have an optimal upper trap to lower trap ratio, or in other words, kind of de-emphasize the upper trap activation. So what does the lower trap do? Well, there's a couple of specific functions that I want to talk about today, and those are: 1, posterior tilt of the scap or the shoulder blade, and 2, upward rotation. And again, I think this picture is really useful because we can kind of see here that we're talking about lower trap. It's not a separate muscle. The trapezius is one muscle, and when you're talking about upper or lower, you're just talking about different sections of the fibers. So we've got upper, mid, upper, mid, and then lower down here. So these guys I've kind of poorly attempted to highlight on paint. sorry about that. These are the guys we're talking about, and these are the 2 main functions. I'll tell you why that's important. Let's go posterior tilt first. So this is a side-on view of the scapula. and this is the glenoid fossa. This is basically the socket, which is a projection of the shoulder blade where the ball would sit right here. And this is your acromion, and I call this, often referred to this as the shelf of the shoulder. So your acromion is kind of this shelf that, if you have an anteriorly tipped or a forward tipping, you see with the arrow, scap, this shelf, this anatomical shelf, really starts to encroach on the ball and socket joint. So you can imagine, as you start to elevate your shoulder upwards, this needs to be able to tilt back and out of the way. And if it doesn't, you're very much liable to impinge any of the structures within this space. And it's a pretty limited space at the best of times, but things like your rotator cuff, your bursa, don't worry if you haven't heard about that before. But basically, rotator cuff is an especially good example because they are your dynamic shoulder stabilizers. If they get impinged, they tend to get irritated. They get impinged constantly. You'll provoke inflammation, and then the cuff function starts to shut down. You're left with a poorly dynamic stabilized shoulder, and you're likely to create rotator cuff damage, and end up with either tears or just symptomatic impingement, basically. So that's the first function. The second function is this upward rotation. You can kind of see it a little bit in the picture here. So now we're looking at it from shoulder blade from behind, and the upper traps do play a certain role in this, but really this is a force couple, as in three muscles that work synergistically to produce this motion of upward rotation. But strictly speaking, it's really the serratus and the lower traps who are most important in this equation. The upper traps do play a role, but it's more in the setting of the scapula. It's more in the first kind of 0 to 30 degrees. After that point, it's really these guys who run the show. And the problem is that if we really have over dominant upper traps here, it can end up leading to more of a shrug pattern and promoting a lot of dysfunction, abnormal function basically in the shoulder, more likely to create injuries. And it's really this guy who's really underused, who we're probably substituting a lot of activation here for. So you can see then that here's the socket, so the shoulder blade needs to be able to rotate upward in this direction, again to allow room for the humerus, your arm bone, to come through here without impinging, and set you up in a nice stable position at the back there. So that's that. So onto our first exercise, and the prone Y lift. I've got a video of me performing it here, and what I want you to have a look at is just kind of what's switching on down here. So let's have a watch. So I'm elevating my arm, obviously the prone being the name, I'm doing this face down on the bench. And the lower traps are really kicking on here, if you can see them. If I've got good ones enough, this is a good test. Right down here, can you see that? I know it's quite faint, but this outline just along here. So that's the first exercise, and I'm going to go on to this in a second, but what I'm making sure of is that as I elevate the arm, the thumb's pointing upwards, I'm externally rotated, and that I'm trying to line my sort of angle of elevation up with the fibre alignment of the lower traps. And as we'll see in a second, this is what really gives you the bang for the buck in terms of specific lower trap activation, if you can line up your angle of elevation with the same line with the fibres. And you notice this, as I do this, there's not a whole bunch of my upper traps relatively passive. Yeah, it's kicking a little bit, but we never said this was lower trap and no upper trap exercise. The only thing that's important is that it's not overemphasizing these guys for these guys. So we go on to the next slide then. You can see this green line, which again I just used to illustrate that point, where here's the edge of my lower traps here, and I'm lining it up with the same angle I'm reaching the arm up. I'm making sure I'm not shrugging up towards my ear here. And another good example of this is a different just find this. Does anyone else? If you don't watch Simpsons, this probably won't mean anything to you, but I always picture that weird green alien whenever I see the name Kang from The Simpsons. But anyway, totally irrelevant point. So 10 years later, this study, and this is nothing to do with lower traps or upper traps or anything, but it is to do with the effects, the massive game-changing effects you can have if you line up the joints with the muscle fiber alignment of the muscle you're trying to activate. So this study was looking at activation of glutes and hamstrings during a prone, again same position, face down, hip extension, and they performed this in 3 different angles of abduction, as in leg out to the side, in 30 subjects. And anyway, not to bore you again, I'm not going to go into super geeky appraisal of this study for now, but on the left picture here you can see the levels of glute activation, and here are the 3 degrees. So they had it at 0 or neutral, 15 degrees and 30 degrees of leg out to the side, and here's the level of activation they achieved. So you can see in a neutral position, as in with the leg just as it would be in standing, yielded the least amount of activation of all 3. And the further the leg comes out to the side, 15, especially at 30 degrees, you see this massive upsurge in activation. Conversely, with the hamstrings, it's completely the opposite case. So when the leg was at 0 degrees, you actually had the highest activation out of all of them. And then if we look at a picture of the glutes, you can see kind of what I'm getting at here and why this is true. So this is with the hip joint in neutral, and we're looking at sort of backside view here, if you haven't already guessed. And you can see, I don't know if you can see this, but the fibres of these glutes run kind of obliquely, kind of diagonally here. They're not straight down like this. And I guess that's approximately about a sort of 30 degree angle out to the side. So you can then imagine then this is the first position they performed the hip extension, why it potentially didn't yield as much activation compared to when the leg was completely in line with where the glute max fibers run out here. And also why the hamstring activation was highest with the leg in neutral, as the hamstring fibers do run straight down. So again, useful for the glutes. I might do another presentation on that at a different time, but you can see now what I'm saying about the upper trap deal. So if we go back to this picture here, you can see that the fibers run up here, so not in a straight line upwards, obliquely. So if I can line the arm up straight in line with here, I'm going to get more activation than if I'm down here or up here or whatever. The next exercise, the shoulder W. So the shoulder W looks like this. And I'm doing this with a piece of just light TheraBand here. I happen to be doing it on a gym ball as well. You don't have to do it on a gym ball, but ideally, if you've got one, it's great to be able to do that. I'll explain that in a second. But there's a little rear view for you there. All right. Okay. Moved on too soon. So the seated W is another really good bang for your buck exercise, and I know this presentation is focused on lower trap, but again, you cast your mind back to that picture we showed at the start with the 3 muscles, upper, lower, and serratus, acting as that force couple to rotate your shoulder blade upwards. The seated W is a trifecta in that it helps to engage external rotation, or not to engage the movements of external rotation of your shoulder, retraction of your shoulder blade, and the posterior tilt we mentioned at the start of your shoulder blade. And the fact that you get all those movements in one activates a lot of these muscles that we're trying to get after, At the same time, again, as de-emphasizing the lower traps here. So you get posterior cuff activation, rotator cuff that is, with the external rotation. You get a little bit of thoracic extension as well, which is ideal. And with the posterior the posterior tilt there, we also start to engage obviously the lower traps and the serratus as well. It's a good postural exercise in itself. You shouldn't really feel any upper trap activation whilst you're doing this. And I'm seated on the gym ball. Again, this isn't really an important point because, as I say, it's not essential that you do this. But if you struggle, if you do this, say, just on a regular bench, and you struggle to feel it, sometimes some people can end up in a situation, sometimes especially if they've got shoulder instability, poor cuff activation, and it's been substituted for a lot of pec and lat over global muscle dominance, and can be very hard to feel that activation switch on. So sometimes if you perform these exercises in a somewhat of an unstable environment, that basically triggers the more reactive core activation. It can help to tone down, switch off those over dominant muscles, and make it easier for you to get that selective activation of the underactive muscles that we're talking about. So that's the CTW. Now the last one is the prone A, or some people call it A lift, but it's basically shoulder extension. And here's how it looks. So in the same position. Oh, sorry, I guess I forgot to mute this one. Same position I was in the prone wire lift, but my arms are coming back out to the side now, like an A, I guess. But anyway, now this isn't maybe the most or the best, I should say, exercise for in comparison to the first one for the ratios and the level of activation of the lower trap. However, there's a lot of people that the first exercise it just won't be accessible to, and a lot of times that's that's due to poor mobility, in the shoulder, in the scap, maybe even the thoracic spine, which means that you can do you can attempt to do the right thing, but if you don't manage to get in the right position, if you don't have the prerequisite mobility to be able to do it, then you're not going to get, regardless of what any study says, you're not going to be able to get the activation because you're compensating to be able to move into that position. So I put this in here because, one, I've come across people struggling with that first exercise a lot. So as much as it's good, and I do obviously advocate it, I don't if, again, you don't have that prerequisite mobility. So the last exercise here is a lot more accessible, and even though it might not have as favourable numbers for activation, you still definitely do get lower trap activation. It's actually a lot easier to de-emphasize the upper trap, and again, it doesn't require nearly as much mobility as the previous one. But a couple of mistakes are very easy to make here. So this is a scapular setting exercise in nature, so we want to make sure that the shoulder blade is being gently tucked back and down first, not like squeezed into a locked back position, but we don't want the shoulder kind of translating downwards as shown here. What we do want is the shoulder blade set back and down. You can see I've got this really flattering double chin posture, which is also what you want to be setting yourself up to do. So forehead on the bench, tuck your chin in, double chin posture, shoulder blade set back and down, like so. And you can see the difference between where my shoulder was here, how much space there is between the bench and my shoulder, and how much space there is now. And this is what we want. That's going to set you up to get the most out of that lower trap activation. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed again. Hope it was useful. Just a couple of things to finish off. So, really appreciate it if you would take a quick trip to Athlete Fix on Facebook, either the page, give us a like, and feel free to jump into the group. If you request invite, I'll add you. Twitter, you can find us at Athlete Fix, and of course the website again, athletefix.co.uk. Feel free to check out some of the content there. Trying to update it regularly, and there'll be videos every week. So thanks again, guys, and hopefully see you next time.